let me first explain to you what an ethnicity is. It's the identity of a group of people who share the cultural traditions of a particular homeland or hearth. Race is the identity of a group of people who share the biological ancestor. The most common ethnicities within the U.S. are African Americans and Hispanic Latinos, about making up about 13% each. Others include Asian Americans at 4% and American Indians at 1%. The 14 races within the U.S., as decided by the census, are white, black African American Negro, American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian Indian, Chinese, Filipino, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Native Hawaiian, Gumain Chamorro, Samoan, other Pacific Islanders, and lastly, other races. Within a country, clustering of ethnicities may occur on a regional scale or within particular neighborhoods of cities. At the regional scale, in the US, African Americans are clustered in the southeast, Hispanics in the southwest, Asians in the west, and Native Americans in the southwest and Great Plains. Within cities, however, African Americans are highly clustered within them, and greater than 50% of blacks live within these cities. An example would be Detroit. African Americans comprise 80% of the population, but only 1/14 of the population of the rest of Michigan. The distribution of Hispanics in the northern cities is similar to that of African Americans. For instance, New York is 1/4 Hispanic, but only 1/16 the rest of New York. The clustering of ethnicities is especially visible on the neighborhood level, such as in Chicago, where many immigrants from South and East Europe tended to chain migrate to specific city blocks in such density that certain areas of town became known for a specific ethnicity. More recently, however, descendants of European immigrants are more likely to retain their ethnic identity through religion, food, and other cultural traditions, rather than through location of residence. Increasingly, the ethnic concentrations in the U.S. are African Americans from the South, Hispanics, or Asians. The current clustering of African Americans within the U.S. result from three major migration flows. One being immigration from Africa in the 18th century via the slave trade, and two, immigration from the South to northern cities during the first half of the 20th century, and finally, three, immigration from inner city ghettos to other urban neighborhoods in the second half of the 20th century. The triangular slave trade is what was used to transport the Africans. So it's an efficient triangular trading pattern used to transport trinkets from Europe to Africa, slaves from Africa to the Caribbean, and molasses from the Caribbean to Europe. An optional stop was from the Caribbean with molasses to the U.S. to exchange for rum, and then back to Europe. A sharecropper is an individual who works fields rented from a landowner and pays the rent by turning over to the landowner a share of the crops. Racism is a belief that race is a primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. A racist is a person who subscribes to the beliefs of racism. White flight is the rapid fleeing of whites from the cities as blacks emigrate out of the ghettos, or as the ghettos expands. It was encouraged by blockbusting, and both of these are examples of racism and racists, because blockbusting is a real estate practice of scaring whites into selling their homes at low prices by telling them that blacks would soon be moving in, causing property values to fall. The real estate agents then turned around and sold the homes at extremely high prices to blacks that were emigrating from the inner city. Why do ethnicities have distinctive distributions? And most of it is because most African Americans are descendants from Africans forced to migrate to the Western Hemisphere, and most Asian Americans and Hispanics are descendants from voluntary immigrants to the United States during the late 20th and early 21st century. Forced migration from Africa is basically just a product of slavery, since slavery is a system whereby one person owns another person as a piece of property. And throughout the 18th century, slaves were taken from their homes in Africa to the Americas. The triangular slave trade is a little bit more in depth than what we stated in TH1, And actually, this one's just going over like how they transported the goods. So the ships left from Europe for Africa with clothes and other trade goods. They then transported slaves and gold from Africa to the Western Hemisphere, and to complete the triangle, then some ships then carried sugar and molasses from the Caribbean. Voluntary migration from Latin America and Asia is due because of immigration from Mexico and Puerto Rico. Chinese comprise the most of Asian Americans, and international migration of African Americans. African Americans have two distinctive ways of migration, and it's interregional migration and intra-regional migration. It goes from East Coast Carolinas to other South Atlantic states, East Central from Alabama to Detroit, West Central from Mississippi and Western Tennessee to North North St. Louis, from Southwest from Texas west to California. Southern African Americans migrated north and west in two main waves. Many of these people were sharecroppers, as we went over in Kyushu 1, and white flight was a really big part of this as well. And segregation by race, the U.S. had enabled segregated but equal treatment of both blacks and whites. Jim Crow laws, which were laws enacted by southern states, which separated blacks and whites as much as possible. And cultural segregation is two museums in Detroit illustrate the difficulties. There are two museums in Detroit that illustrate the difficulties of cultural segregation: the Detroit Institute of Arts and the Museum of African American History.
Ethnicity and race are separate from nationality. Nationality is identity with a group of people who share legal and personal allegiance with a country. Cultural values shared through nationality include voting, obtaining a passport, and civic duties. In the US, nationality is kept distinct in common usage. However, outside North America, the distinctions between nationality and ethnicity are a bit muddier. This is this is due to the controlled history of the kings in the area, conquering each other's land. In Lebanon, religious ethnicities are separated in the government, and civil wars have been fought for equal treatment. In Sri Lanka, ethnicities have been divided by European rule. In South Asia, India, and Pakistan originally were one colony, but religious differences caused the countries to separate. The Kurds have struggled the Kurds have struggled as an ethnicity to become a nationality. Ethnic diversity in Iraq has led to the creation of separate tribes and clans. In Iran, ethnicities have struggled to maintain a single religious identity. In Afghanistan, religious groups fight for control as the Taliban gains influence. Pakistanis are struggling. Pakistanis are struggling as the neighboring nationalities, specifically the Taliban from Afghanistan, try to gain power and land. Ethnic cleansing is the process where one ethnic group forcibly removes a weaker ethnic group to create an ethnically equal region. One of the most notorious examples of this is the Holocaust. After World War II, millions of people were forced to migrate. While the scale of the Holocaust has not been replicated, thank God, ethnic cleansing still occurs in the Balkan Mountains. After World War I, Yugoslavia was created. The creation of Yugoslavia created stability that lasted for part of the 20th century. Rivalries among ethnicities resurfaced in Yugoslavia and caused the country to break up eventually. After Yugoslavia broke up, Up, the population of Bosnia and Herzegovina was 48% Bosnian Muslims, 37% Serbs, and 14% Croats. Serbs and Croats had tried to break away after Yugoslavia's breakup. Serbia took control of Kosovo and began ethnic cleansing the area. The Yugoslavia region had so much trouble that the term Balkanized, a small geographic area that could not be successfully organized into one or more stable states due to the amount of varying ethnicities, was made in reference to the area. Genocide is the mass killing of a group in an attempt to eliminate the entire group from existence. In Sudan, many civil wars have been enraged between the ethnicities and the occupying the area. In South Sudan, Black, Christian, and animist ethnicities resisted attempts to convert the country to a nationality tied with Muslim traditions. In Darfur, Black Africans launched a rebellion, but 480,000 died as it failed. Ethiopia was given Eritrea and banned the local language, and in turn, a 30-year fight for independence began. In Somalia, there are 7 main clans that began fighting once the country's dictator fell. There are many other examples in Central Africa alone, which is kind of sad. Ethnic cleansing is widespread in Africa because the boundaries for the countries do not match up with the boundaries for the ethnicities. When the colonies in Africa became independent, the boundaries were similar to the colonial imposed boundaries. As a result, ethnicities were divided among more than one modern state.